So, welcome everybody to NYU's home in Washington, D.C. We are very delighted to be here. We moved in last fall, and as of last week, we welcomed our second cohort of students. These students are here, they're studying, they're also participating in very important internships across the city. And a very special welcome today to a group who has traveled the farthest to be here this evening. These are young leaders from Abu Dhabi, and they're known as the Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Scholars. So welcome to you for joining us tonight in Washington. They are guided by Diane Yu, the assistant president at NYU, who has been introducing them around to members of the Supreme Court and members of Congress, and it's been a really wonderful couple of days, I understand. I'd also like to recognize Michael Ulrich, the director of the Washington, D.C. site, and he joins me in welcoming all of you. I'm Alicia Hurley, the director of the John Brademas Center for the Study of Congress. The center was established to allow for these important conversations and to raise public awareness of the issues that can either cripple or create good policy. Now, unfortunately, we've been on more of a crippled policy world for the past decade or so, a phenomena which was not the case actually when John Brademas was in Congress 40 years ago. But these are the types of issues that we're going to hear from our panelists tonight. Why is everything crippled and bogged down? And what are some of the policy measures that need to be put in place to help support all Americans across the world of politics and inequality, the economy, the role of money in politics, the role of political parties. Before I introduce the panelists, I'd like to give a special thanks to Neil and Judy Bicknell, who were critical in developing tonight's program. If you wouldn't mind thanking them for me. And a special thank you to Americans for Campaign Reform and their generosity in co-sponsoring. The panelists' bios are in the pamphlet that you have. I encourage you to catch up with those a little later, but right now, just briefly, I want to introduce Mike Castle. He is a partner at the law firm of DLA Piper. Mike served as governor of Delaware as well as a congressman representing Delaware for a number of years. Mickey Edwards is the vice president of the Aspen Institute and the director of the Institute Rodell Fellowship in Public Leadership. He is the director of the Constitution Project, which we want to hear more about. And Mickey was a member of Congress for 16 years and a member of the House Republican leadership. His latest book, The Parties versus the People, How to Turn Republicans and Democrats into Americans, is available in the lobby, and I think you've signed some copies, which we are grateful for. Hedrick Smith is a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter and editor, an Emmy Award-winning producer and correspondent. For 26 years, he covered Washington and world capitals for the New York Times, and from 1976 to 88, he was the New York Times Washington bureau chief and chief correspondent. I will say I used your books when I both was getting my PhD and then teaching a class, so I'm particularly grateful to you, Mr. Smith. You also have a publication out in the lobby called Who Stole the American Dream? And I'm particularly pleased tonight that we have the best moderator in Washington, D.C., and I don't think you can say that lightly, but I'd like to welcome our alum, Ray Suarez, who is a senior correspondent for the PBS NewsHour. Ray has more than 30 years of varied experience in the news business, and he helped us launch this center just a mere 5 months ago, and we're particularly grateful to have you back tonight. So last but not least, certainly, is Alice Rivlin, who's a senior fellow of economic studies at Brookings Institute and an expert on fiscal and monetary policy. She's the co-chair of the Debt Reduction Task Force and also co-leader of the Healthcare Cost Containment Initiative, that is a mouthful, for the Bipartisan Policy Center. She's a visiting professor at the Public Policy Institute of Georgetown. Ms. Rivlin was the founding director of the Congressional Budget Office and served as the director for the White House Office of Management and Budget and was the Federal Reserve Vice Chair. Madam, I hand the table over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to be leading off this very impressive panel, which will discuss some really important issues that we need as Americans to be focusing on. I need to say first that John Brademas was really important in my life. When my first experience on Capitol Hill was working with a small group, a select committee of 5 members of Congress who were all quite junior. They were second-termers. I won't tell you when that is, but it was a long time ago. And John Brademas was a lively and constructive force in those days and for a very long time in the Congress, and I miss him. Our theme tonight is reclaiming the American dream. And several of us in this group have written books with American Dream in the title somehow or other, reviving it, reclaiming it, doing something to get it back. So I think I ought to start by saying, what do we mean by the American dream? To me, it has at least 3 aspects. One is individual opportunity. We think of ourselves as a country where people have chances to make something of their lives, to get an education, to acquire skills and knowledge, to work hard, to be successful. They have a chance to have a decent income, to own their own home if they want to gain respect in their communities. Now, historically, we did pretty well on many of these things, though never as well as we pretended. We had a great infusion of money, public money, into creating public schools very early, schools for everyone. We had great public universities, and not just for the elite, and community colleges. We thought we did better at this than the more structured hierarchical societies of Europe. We were very proud of that for a long time. That's less true now than it used to be. And individual opportunity also involved second chances. It involved waves of immigrants coming to the United States, fleeing oppression and poverty and getting a new chance on our shores. And it involved people who messed up somehow or other, getting back on the track and rebuilding their lives. Now, I'm an economist, so I have to think about this in terms of what does it mean for the whole economy to have this individual opportunity? What are the macroeconomic aspects, as we say, of this? And I think they're best defined as saying what we would like to achieve and have achieved at some time is sustainable growth in our economy that is widely shared. We did best at that in the years just after World War II. They were a time when productivity was high, when much of the rest of the world was in shambles, both the victors and the vanquished, when education was expanding, when wages and incomes were going up in the United States at all income levels about proportionately. It's quite amazing. And many of us came to think that was kind of normal. Although it had not been true in much of our history. There were many periods in our history where the gains were unequally shared. The 1890s, the 1920s had very unequal distribution of the gains, and we've come back to that. And third, there is the democracy aspect. We believe that the American dream is a democracy in which all are represented, but government functions to solve public problems. We have, as the President pointed out in his recent inaugural address, both individualistic and communitarian strands throughout our history. We have a healthy suspicion of central authority. That's how we got started as a nation. And we worry about government overreach. This runs deep. And we are too big a country to rely only on a central government. Our states and localities are very important as the locus of democratic decisions and the places that deliver many of our public services, in fact, most. And we also have a tradition of groups coming together to help each other, to solve problems. Tocqueville noticed this centuries ago. It now focuses on our profusion, which is quite unique in this country, of nonprofit organizations that take part in our civic life. Now, at the moment, it is pretty fashionable, I guess it often is, to be very despairing and down. The media likes that. It's always easier to get wide press if you talk about the American dream is in tatters, people can't get ahead anymore, the economy is declining, other countries are gaining on us, they're growing faster, our moral fiber is destroyed. I think people my age have always said that. Every year, every generation thinks the moral fiber is destroying. That people are selfish, that they just want handouts, that nobody cares about others, or that government is out of control. Some of that's true, but not all of it. I don't share in this general despairing view, or even in the nostalgia for the golden age after World War II, when the American dream was thought to be in full flower. Now, undeniably, there were great aspects of that period, the high productivity growth, the incomes going up at all levels, the GI Bill, and the explosion of education. But think about it. There were a lot of things wrong that are better now. Women were not sharing in this vibrant economy and were very restricted with respect to roles and careers. Blacks, Hispanics, other minorities were not sharing and were deeply discriminated against. We had desperate poverty in rural areas and city slums. Healthcare was far from as effective as it is now and less widely available. And we were also sowing the seeds of future problems. Wages that were too high to compete in the world, as it turned out, pensions promised that were not sustainable, sprawl, air and water pollution. So let's be a little realistic about the American dream. It's an ongoing work in progress, and it has never been something that was there and we lost it. We need to define it and get to it. So my more optimistic view of is not with the decline folks. Actually, I think there's not much wrong with our economy that isn't fixable if we undertake the right policies. The serious obstacle to our well-being over the next several decades, I think, is not anything that is wrong with our economy or our economic situation. It is the polarization and really bad vibes, if you like, of our current political system. It didn't start with the last election, but the last election was really a good example of what a democracy shouldn't sound like. A lot of blaming. It's your fault. No, it's your fault. A lot of impugning of other people's motives and intentions. And very hard to hear reasoned debate about what would solve the problems of the country going forward. And we have to come across those party lines and those ideological lines if we are going to solve the major problems facing this country, or that's probably true of any country. We cannot afford gridlock at this time especially. Gridlock means nothing happens. It means each side says, we won't give an inch, we've got our proposals, we've got our ideology, we're not going to work with you because our principles say we can't compromise, so nothing happens. Our Constitution was not set up to allow us gridlock. It was constructed by people who didn't want things to happen easily. They didn't create, and they could have, a parliamentary system in which some party is elected and is allowed then to decide what happens until there's a new election and the other party takes over. We don't work that way. We didn't want to work that way. We have all these checks and balances built into our Constitution so that even when a president is elected and controls both houses of Congress, controls in quotes, his party is the majority in both houses of Congress. Even when that's true, it is rare that the president can do what he wants. Maybe in an enormous crisis, like Roosevelt in 1933. But those crises don't happen very often. The president has to negotiate with the Congress, with the House and the Senate, and is part of the deal, but not the whole thing. And we cannot afford gridlock at the moment because we are faced with some pretty big problems that get worse if we do nothing. The one I will talk about for just a minute, because I've been so involved in it, is the problem of the rising debt as we look ahead. But there are others. There's climate change. There's immigration. And there are a whole host of problems that if we just sit there and do nothing because we're so gridlocked, will get worse and fester, and we will have no progress. But come back to the economy. I'm fairly optimistic about the economy, and it's reasonable. I think it has reasonable prospects for the future if we don't mess up. Why am I so optimistic? Well, take a look at what's happened to the American economy. It's proved itself extremely resilient over many years in the face of extraordinary shocks. And you couldn't have a better example than the shock of the financial catastrophe of 2008. That didn't have to happen. It shouldn't have happened. We should have avoided that, but it did happen. It was an enormous shock to the economy. And what happened after that? Well, miraculously, our public policy, our public authorities functioned quite well. We saved the financial system. It wasn't pretty, but we had to do that. We can't run the economy without banks, and they were about to collapse. We had a major stimulus program which kept money in people's pockets as the unemployment rate was soaring and incomes were plunging. And again, that was controversial. I think it probably wasn't big enough. Some people think it was too big. But it did the job. And my former colleagues at the Federal Reserve acted with dispatch and aggressiveness. And the economy turned around. Why did it turn around? Well, I think two things. One is our institutions functioned quite well, not just the ones I've mentioned, but the basic ones that we put in place at the end of the Great Depression of the 1930s. Nobody rushed down to pull their money out of their bank account because they knew it was insured and they didn't have to worry about it. People's incomes were held up by unemployment compensation. and by Social Security and Medicare. We had a whole sector of the economy, older people, that were not affected seriously. But the most important thing was the resilience of this economy in keeping going, getting back to work, and the amazing fact that this revolution on the internet and in social media, engineered by our companies, kept right on chugging right through this whole debacle. So what do we do now? Well, we've got to keep this recovery going, and we can't allow ourselves to do the kind of austerity that is proving so disastrous in Europe. We've got to invest in the future of education and skills and do a better job with modernizing our infrastructure. But most important, we've got to get our budget back in the long run on a sustainable track. And that is going to take bipartisan cooperation across the party lines, a grand bargain, as those of us who've worked on this problem like to call it, or a not-so-grand bargain maybe, but one that will slow the growth of our entitlement programs and raise more revenue through tax reform. Now, that's been known for a couple of years, but nothing's happened. This is where the gridlock has come in. The two parties have said, we're not going to work together on this. We'd rather do nothing than have a compromise. I'm a little more optimistic now. I submit that the election that we've just lived through proves that in many ways, the public is less polarized than the politicians, and more important, the politicians know that. There are plenty of polls that show the public far less polarized than our politicians. But if you listen to the rhetoric of the last campaign, there weren't very many specific proposals. Take Medicare, for example. Neither side had a really drastic Medicare proposal. Each side was saying, the other guy, if you elect him, he's going to destroy your Medicare. Well, what does that tell you? It tells you Medicare is pretty important. All the politicians know that. They want to scare seniors that somebody else is going to do something bad about it, but they're probably not. So where does that leave us? As I said, getting together on the budget deficit is not the only thing we need to do. We've got to solve the immigration problem. We've got to solve climate change. And that means we have to get our two parties working together again. And we're going to talk about that in this panel. We have former members of Congress with interesting ideas about what went wrong and how to fix it. And we have Hedrick Smith, who's talked a lot about these issues and how we ought to get there. And I hope we can have a very fruitful discussion, not only among ourselves, but with this audience and with the wider audience about how do we get back to a government that is functioning, solving problems, coming together, compromising. Nobody gets exactly what they want, but at least we get the problem moved on and can do other things. That, I think, is the important missing element in the American dream at the moment. Thank you.
Because to me, what's been interesting and what got me started in writing the book, Who Stole the American Dream, was to look at the middle class and where it was and where it is today, and to look at the relatively shared prosperity and the enormous inequalities we have today, both in our economic and our political system. I don't think we can reclaim the dream until we can redress some of those terrible imbalances, and that does involve some of the political and economic steps that Alice was talking about earlier. But before I get into the broad picture, I just want to remind myself and others that the people who aren't represented in this room and often aren't represented in discussions like this are the folks we're talking about. I'm talking about Pat O'Neill, who for 35 years was a Jet Airlines mechanic for United Airlines at O'Hare. And while we were all sleeping in our hotel rooms, they were up working in the midnight cold to make sure the planes were flying the next day. In 35 years of work, when he finished that, he was about to retire. United declared bankruptcy. His 401k plan collapsed in half. His employee stock option plan went from $80,000 to $2,000. His retirement pension from United was cut by $1,000 a month, and Pat O'Neill could not afford to retire. He's working now 10 years later, and he cannot see when he will ever be able to afford to retire. So we're talking about people like that. That's part of the dream, being able to retire. I'm talking about Kristen Serrana, who got a degree in computer science and even got a graduate degree, went to work for QWest, then worked for IBM, became a systems manager, was so good at her job that she became a manager and a trainer of others. And then at one point she suddenly discovered she was training people in India who took her job, and she was fired by IBM. So we're talking about people like that, who played the game the way they were supposed to. They went into the knowledge economy. Supposedly education protected you in America, gave you a good job, and she wound up without one, and she's been scrambling ever since. I'm talking about Pam Scholl and Mike Hughes, who came out of high school in Chillicothe, Ohio, back in 1971, got a job almost right away at the RCA Television 2 plant next door. 35 years working for the plant. 2004, the plant shut down. Pam jumped around, got a job or two, eventually got laid off, went for 18, 20 months without work, and she said, "You have no idea how terrible it is to feel unneeded, useless." And there are millions of people. We now have 20 million plus people in America, either not working or working part-time against their will, who don't have that basic aspect of the American dream, that is a job, a livelihood, and self-respect. And Mike Hughes, who worked his way up at RCA to get a $65,000 technical supervisor job, bounced around, and is now working as a night custodian at a local high school for $13,000 a year, 20% of what he made before. So when we're talking about the American dream, we're talking about that. What happened? There was this shared prosperity, not just in the 10 or 15 years after World War II, but from 1945 until the mid-70s. The productivity of the American workforce rose 97%, and the pay of the median family in America, the compensation, rose 95%. So wages, living standards rose with productivity. A rising tide literally lifted all boats. And there were several reasons for this. One reason was we had powerful trade unions that could negotiate with companies like General Motors, General Electric, and they could get guaranteed jobs. They had strikes, but they had pay, and the pay rose. They had health benefits. They had retirement benefits. 5 out of 6 workers in 1980 had retirement benefits for the rest of their lives paid for by their employers. The number is 30% today. So there was an underpinning there. And that rested on middle-class political power. The power of labor unions, the power of the consumer movement, the power of the environmental movement, the power of the women's movement, which played a big role in lifting women's pay, which, as Alice said, was not fair back in the early pre-war, post-war period. So, and they're also rested on an ethos of business leaders that they should share the wealth. If you read the writings of Charlie Wilson, who ran General Motors, or Reg Jones, who ran General Electric, or Frank Abrams, who ran Standard Oil of New Jersey, each one of them felt it was their stewardship, their trust, to balance the interest of the stakeholders, very important word, stakeholders in the company. That is all the groups that had a stake in the success of the company. Of course, the owners, but the managers, the employers, the creditors, the suppliers, the customers, the communities they operated in. That was the animating spirit. And by the way, trading in company stock and getting stock options was frowned upon by business leaders in that era. So what happened? We moved from that era to an era of shareholder capitalism, where business leaders were taught at business schools and came to believe their one object was to ensure the highest possible return to the shareholders. Not stakeholders, but focus on one thing, focus on profits. Focusing on profits often meant that wages suffered, and that's exactly what happened. If you look at the 30 years from 1975, actually more than 30 years, to 2011, productivity rose for the American workforce 80%, average compensation rose 10%. 80%, 10%. If we had had the same kind of division of the spoils of the growth of the American dream that we had had back in that post-war period, The bottom 80% of Americans would have gotten $675 billion a year more every year since the 1970s. And the top 1% would have gotten $750 billion a year less. So we have enormous inequalities now that have come out of these wedge economics and shareholder capitalism. I don't have time to go into all of it, but that had enormous impact the way our economy operated and the way it shared the wealth that the country was generating in a very new competitive environment. Politics changed the same way. I mentioned before that middle-class prosperity, the dream for tens of millions, maybe more than 100 million Americans in the middle class, rested on middle-class power, exercised and having a great influence on Washington in field after field, in tax law, in environmental law, in labor law, in the regulation of the excesses of American capitalism. But beginning in the late 70s, the trend began to move in the other way, in the other direction. We got deregulation. We began to get tax decreases on the people at the top of the income scale, while the payroll tax, affecting everybody, but particularly people at the bottom and the middle of the scale, was doubled. We got deregulation. We got the 401k plan, which changed the burden for funding retirement from company books to the pocketbooks and the checkbooks of average Americans, hundreds of billions of dollars a year. So not only do you have pay stagnant and leveling, but you've got the economic burden of the middle class increasing, and increasing in part by policies, and policies that start, believe it or not, under the Democrats in the late 1970s, even before you get Republican Ronald Reagan accelerating the trend, and then George W. Bush doing the same in the last decade. So what's happened is we have a situation now where it's very hard for a lot of Americans to live the dream that was possible for them to live before. You have it because of political changes, and part of what is responsible is the gridlock that Alice was talking about. Gridlock tends to enforce the status quo. Gridlock tends to prevent change and reform. And there are lots of reasons for the gridlock. One of the reasons, which I'm sure Mickey Edwards and others are going to get into, is the gerrymandering of congressional districts. The drawing of the lines of American political districts all across the country in ways that protect either one party or the other. In Massachusetts and Connecticut, it's the Democrats who've been doing it. In North Carolina and Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, it's particularly the Republicans who've been doing it. In California, the Democrats. In Texas, the Republicans. But what's happened is, for example, in the last election, we had more people voting for Democratic candidates for the House of Representatives than for Republicans, and yet the Republicans wound up with a 33-vote majority. And it is contributed to the polarization of our politics, because when people have safe districts, it turns out that the party voters are the ones that turn out, the party loyalists. And so there's a tendency to pull the politicians to the extremes, to the left among Democrats and to the right among Republicans. So when we go back to look at what we need to do about America and how we get back to the dream, yes, we have to rebuild our infrastructure. Yes, we have to change our tax system. But we've also got to get back to our thinking about the way prosperity is built and how it's shared, and how our politics will operate so we can regenerate the political middle that made political compromise possible and helped support the growth of the American dream. Thank you.
Well, the first thing I want to say is, for whoever is putting out the transcript, I want you to pretend that I said everything that Alice and Rick said. Glad to have myself associated with it. It's, as others have said, it's a great honor to be here, and it's a great honor to be connected with the Brademas Center. I served in Congress with John Brademas, an amazing man who really represented the very best in public service and took that to NYU and building this center. So, I'm just proud to be part of anything that the Brademas Center puts on. When we talk about reclaiming the American dream, I think we have to start with, what was the American dream? Alice mentioned part of that, which is opportunity, the chance to better yourself, to have a good job, to take care of your families. But there are other parts of that American dream, and one of them was that we had a system. The founders made a very clear distinction that we were going to be citizens, not subjects. Subjects are told by their government what to do. Citizens tell their government what to do. And part of that was that our government would be selected by the people, and the people would hold the government accountable. It was we, the people, who would be the government through our representatives. The reality is a little bit different today. That part of the dream has gone by the wayside for a couple of reasons. One of them that Rick has already mentioned. One of them is the party primary system that we have created, because the idea was that it is the people, the constituency, whatever community you're in, whatever state you're in, whatever congressional district you're in or legislative district, it is the people in that community who would select one from their number to sit in Washington and decide whether we go to war, to decide what our tax policies are going to be, what we're going to spend our monies on. But now with the closed party primaries that we have developed, despite the warnings of Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, all who said do not create these kinds of political parties, and we ignored their advice, as a result of it is we now have closed party primaries in which the decisions about who can be on the ballot in November are made not by the general electorate, by all of you, but by small ideological subsets of the electorate, so that in some states, I'll pick Utah as an example, 2,000 people at a state party convention were able to tell 3 million people that the person they most likely would have selected for the U.S. Senate was not eligible to be on the ballot, because of the fact that we have closed party primaries that nominate, and if you ran for your party's nomination and you did not get it, in 46 of the 50 states, you are then not allowed to be on the ballot in November. Sore loser laws by collusion of the two major political parties. A second part of this political system that has taken away and undermined the Democratic part. We are a republic, but we're also a democracy in the sense that the people are supposed to rule. And part of that is a provision in the Constitution, maybe the most important part of the Constitution, that says that every single senator and representative must be an actual inhabitant of the state from which they are elected. What does that mean? It means that when you go vote, you pick one of your own. You pick a neighbor. You pick somebody from your community to speak for you in government, and that's because they know you. They're familiar with your concerns, your interests, your preferences, and so you have a voice at the table. But we've allowed the political parties, through control of redistricting by the state legislatures in 37 of the 50 states, to draw districts so that we have, and I know this from personal example because it was me, you have somebody who's barely ever been on a farm representing wheat farmers and cattle ranchers and trying to speak for them and support their interests in Washington. So let me conclude by just saying quickly one final thing. It is part of the system politically that we've created. It is the fact that we need a citizenry that is engaged, that is informed, that knows critical thinking. And I will just, so when I talk about the problems, what do we do? What do we do? Let me close with Edna St. Vincent Millay in her poem to Inez Milholland at the dedication of the statue to the suffragettes. Forget the epitaph. Take up the flag.
Thank you, everybody. I'm also very, very pleased to be here. I would like to sort of maybe amend a little bit the resume business. You know, you hear about how fancy everybody is and all these wonderful things we've done. I would tell you that I have not written a book, American Dream, in it or not. I just haven't done that yet, but I know what I'm going to name it now if I get around to that. I also want to tell you that after all those elections I had over the years, that in 2010 I ran into a bit of a buzzsaw. I decided the time had come after 18 years in the House to run for the United States Senate. And I was doing very well by polling. I was 20 points ahead of my opponent in the general election. And all of a sudden there was a Tea Party issue, and a good deal of money came into the state of Delaware. And a young lady who was very conservative, shall we say, and very Tea Party oriented, ran against me and was endorsed by them, and in a very light turnout, I was defeated in that primary. About 2 or 3 days later, there were national television stories about the fact that she had dabbled in witchcraft when she was very young, which I still think is a little bit unfair to her. But nonetheless, they ran that, and it carried for a while. And her first ad started by saying, "I'm not a witch," which is not exactly the way to start a campaign, if you will. So I'm not proud necessarily that I lost that primary, but it happened. And perhaps in this room, the most alarming part of my resume is I went to Georgetown Law School instead of NYU. So I just throw that out for whatever it's worth, too. I agree with all the speakers here today. What they say makes a huge amount of sense in terms of what we have to do. I think the polarization is great today. I mean, you can go back to Cicero, or you can deal with Jefferson and Adams, or Lincoln and Douglas, or whatever you want to do. But in terms of just the pure politics of America today, I think that the polarization is as great as it has ever been. And even in the time I've been in government, some 30, 35 years, it's grown tremendously. We've already heard here, and it's correct, we cannot build coalitions in order to get things done now, because people just assail each other, if you will. It's true of the media too, by the way, and the media should not be exempted through all this. We'll excuse our great narrator here tonight, but the bottom line is that the media has become very polarized. I mean, you take a Glenn Beck or a Rachel Maddow, and people choose those people. If you're ideologically oriented, you tend to choose to watch the people who agree with you, and that becomes the selling cause, if you will. The parties have become more polarized, the political parties. There's also the use of computers. People can instantly take almost any piece of legislation and say that hurts somebody, or it spends too much money, or whatever it may be, and say that that bum who voted for it is no good, you ought to throw him out of office. And that happens on a regular, daily basis, by the way, being issued by the political parties trying to go after the various candidates who are out there. And then you get into the blogs and the websites, which are really out there to a degree, and that becomes problematical as well. And again, that's what people tend to follow. People tend to be very Republican, very Democrat. Things are very black and white in the politics of today. How can we solve these problems? Who knows? Campaign financing is a huge issue for two reasons. One, because it adds to all of this, particularly with the Citizens United case, all the different entities out there that are theoretically not-for-profit entities that are not doing much except waiting to get money and go after one political party or the other. We don't have full disclosure in terms of campaign contributions, which we should have, particularly with the Citizens United matter. I introduced legislation. I'm a Republican with a Democrat to do that, and it just didn't move, and that still needs to move as far as I'm concerned. I think that we could consider something that I became a sponsor of, the Federal Elections Now Act, which would be a voluntary basis, and you could receive a 5-to-1 match for $100 contributions, which would limit the big money coming into government, if you will, but also might invite a lot of people. Perhaps some of you are thinking, gee, I'd like to run for office, but I can't raise the money. And indeed, something like this might give you the opportunity, and we would hope that legislation like that would be considered. We've already heard discussion of the problems of reapportionment. It's great. Does judicial reapportionment work better? That is, judges appointing a reapportionment board or something of that nature. That still remains to be seen, and there's still a lot of gerrymandering that goes on with respect to all the reapportionment and thereby the elections. And so if you're not a Republican or you're not a Democrat, you're probably not going to get elected if you're in the opposite party in those particular areas. I think we need real leadership in economic growth. That's where the income inequality is. That's where a lot of the problems of this country are. We've not had it. We've not had it with the budget and deficit issues in recent years. It has to be addressed. I was pleased to see that there's a Republican group in the last 3 or 4 days we've seen who've come out and said that they are going to start to support more mainstream Republicans because they feel those who are too conservative and too Tea Party can't get elected. I happen to be a sampling of that, but there's others out there as well, and they're right about that as far as I am concerned. But I think ultimately it's the American voters. I think it's all of us and everybody out there who has the right to vote in the United States of America. I think that we need to demand and we need to base our votes and our campaign donations on the ability of the candidates to work, on the ability of the candidates to work with others in order to make this country better, not to further their own re-elections, not necessarily to further their own political parties, but to help their constituents. And I believe if we start to judge politicians that way, instead of saying I'm absolutely liberal or I'm absolutely conservative, I'm absolutely Democrat, I'm absolutely Republican or whatever, we can start to get candidates and attract candidates to run for office who we don't have now. I think the presidents need to lead a little more forcefully than they have in recent years in some very positive ways. I think that's absolutely important. And I agree with the issues that have already been raised here today that any one of you could have raised as well, and that is the issues of the debt and deficit and immigration and the environment, of course. I think I would throw education into that. The cost of higher education is becoming prohibitive in the United States of America today, and that absolutely needs to be addressed. But these things have to happen, and they have to happen, as has already been stated, by people working together, by people saying, look, I believe this, you believe that. Maybe there's some place in the middle we can meet and make things happen for the betterment of the people of the United States of America. It's not going to be easy, and I tend, as I believe it was Alice who said, to believe that maybe we're a little closer to it now than we've been, but we still have a ways to go, and hopefully cooler heads will prevail and we'll have a good few years here, and all of a sudden our economy will rebound. Everybody here will be able to get the job that they want, and hopefully be able to live the good American life that we're all used to. Thank you.